the Ticats Audio Network. This is the CFL This Week with Bubba O'Neil.
There's a wise old tale that says the CFL's regular season officially begins on Labor Day. Well, if that's the case, one team has secured a pass to the second season, meaning the race to the finish line is underway for the remaining 8 clubs. Welcome to the CFL This Week. I'm your host, Bubba O'Neil. From CFL in America, I'd like to welcome Scott Adamson for his maiden voyage on the podcast. Welcome there, Scott.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, although he's not a newbie for the Ticats Audio Network, this is his first appearance on the CFL This Week. Let's say hi to Ticats game day analyst and the host of his own podcast, the Coach O, Luke Tasker.
Bubba, good to see you, man.
Right
on. A lot to talk about here.
Oh, plenty to talk about around the league. And let's welcome back certainly one of my favorites. He's been doing a lot of bragging and boasting for the last couple of seasons, and rightfully so. He is the host of the Winnipeg Sports Talk, Andrew, better known as the Hustler Paterson.
Bubba, thanks for having me. And well, listen, Bomber fans, sure, pumping their chests out a little bit right now, but keep in mind, we've come from a very dark place in Winnipeg for a long time. It still sometimes doesn't seem real, even especially weekends like we just had with that trip out to Regina. But fun week in the Canadian Football League, big rematches coming up next week, and lots to chop up with you fellas.
Folks, let's get right to it. Hey, the Argos end that 7-year Labor Day drought in the city of Hamilton on Labor Day and improved to 6-5. Tiger Cats dropped to 3-9. I'll start with you there, Hustler. First of all, are you more impressed with the winning Argos or more depressed with the Tiger Cats?
I'd have to take the latter. And I can say this as someone that was personally invested in the Ticats in the game on the weekend. I was quite, I think so many people, when you find out that, your number 1 and number 2 quarterbacks are out, you realize this could be a problematic situation. And it proved to be that way. I mean, I thought that they hung in there. I thought the defense played well in the first half. I mean, to keep them in, get that pick 6 and turn that into a tie game. I mean, this was an eminently winnable football game. But I think the disappointment really resides on that offensive side of the football. And I mean, listen, when you're going that deep on the depth chart at the quarterback position, you're up against it. And unfortunately, that created some real problems for the Ticats moving the football. And it seemed like it was a matter of time before the defense would break a little bit. And it happened with Brandon Banks in the second half.
Scott, deep down south, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's very disappointing. I just, I've gotten used to the Ticats being so good for so long, but yeah, you get to this point and you got the quarterback situation like it is. I didn't really expect a lot, but then there's always that hope that, oh, maybe Newman's going to come up with some magic and a superstar will be born. But no, instead, I think this season's pretty much gone from a rescue to a recovery now.
Luke, I mean, you had a bird's eye view of it. I mean, I got to admit, though, McLeod Bethel-Thompson really surprised me the way he played. He was really consistent, hitting those deep and intermediate patterns. And, hey, the Tiger Cats are now looking up 3 games at the Argonauts, and I think they deserve a little credit, don't you think?
You're absolutely right. And my answer directly to your question is, of course, I'm more depressed by the Ticats play than I am impressed by the Argos, but you have to give them credit. They've sort of been the team, meaning the Argonauts, that have been called they're the most mediocre team. They're not bad and they're not great. And they're 500 to show it. But after the Labor Day game, they've got more wins in the win column, and you have to hand it to them. McLeod Bethel-Thompson was impressive at times. They have slow starts to games, and then he kind of finds his way around. And there was a couple stretches there, especially in the second half, where, I mean, he was playing at a high level, and he had guys around him making plays. So, I was actually impressed with the Argonauts. And so frequently this year, Bubba, we've been watching the Ticats beat themselves. And there was that last night, no doubt about it. But the Argonauts also won that game last night with production on offense, forcing turnovers again. That continues to be an issue, but there's kind of a lot of things you could take the conversation of what's wrong with the Tiger Cats in a lot of directions right now.
Hustler, how did the Argos stack up against the Bombers, right? Straight up.
Well, I mean, listen, on paper, I mean, I think you're talking about, basically teams in two different classes right now. But when they played head to head, the Argos have been one of the teams that, has given the Bombers the toughest time. I mean, you think back to that game, they've only played once this season, and it was in week 4. Andrew Harris had a big game, and that one went right down to the wire. If I recall correctly, I think it was a 1-point game. So, I mean, we've seen McLeod Bethel-Thompson has the ability to get on a roll. And, I know there's been a lot of doubters in him over the course of his CFL career, but he's been the last man standing in Toronto, has really established himself as the number 1 quarterback in that division. And to your point and Luke's point, I mean, I thought that, he really did get rolling in the second half. But overall, I mean, if you're putting those two teams on a neutral field, I think the Bombers are going to be a significant favorite, but they'd be that against most teams in the CFL. But it has seemed right now that the Argos on both sides of the football have both the athletes and, listen, the health, at least for the most part, to be playing at a pretty high level. And when you look around the East, especially it's what's happened with Hamilton. I mean, there was already problems within the team. And I mean, then you go down the depth chart at the quarterback position, and it just makes it a real big hill to climb that, unfortunately, for Ticat fans, they weren't able to get over yesterday.
Scott, are they a lock to win the East?
Looks like it to me, but I don't know. I mean, there are no juggernauts in the East, obviously, as we know. So, and still, 8 games left. So, maybe not, but I just like where they're headed. And, I think Montreal in a bit of a flux. And of course, we know about the Ticats in Ottawa. So, I certainly like their chances right now.
It really is a statement in mediocrity. Like, I can't believe that Montreal, you know what I can't believe, guys, is that, and Luke, I know you've been part of some broadcasts with myself and post-game shows, and we kind of felt real safe with Ottawa, right? That Ottawa, we're going to be finishing last, and here we are. The Tiger Cats and Ottawa are tied on wins, and unfortunately, the Tiger Cats, correct me if I'm wrong, they got one more loss than the Red Blacks do.
That's right. The Red Blacks have a game to be played in hand ahead of the Ticats. And of course, the Ticats have the record breaker, head to head with the Red Blacks as it stands right now. But there's multiple matchups in the last third of the season here for those teams together. I do not think you can safely say that the Ticats are in any substantial way ahead of the Red Blacks in the East standings right now. I don't know if they'd be favored in head to head, or if they will be going into this game. And that's an alarming reality, because like you said, that first third of the season, it's like Ticat fans were like, at least we know that we're not last place in the East. And when you went into that early in the season, the Ticats, the not undefeated, but the fully defeated Ticats played the all defeated Edmonton Elks, and you thought, well, okay, this one will happen, this one will go the Ticats way. And then again, back to back with Ottawa, both teams having not won a game, and they finally got their win there. But things have only gotten worse for the Ticats, and we, as we've mentioned already, specifically at the quarterback position. And I think you'll hear all kinds of things from Ticat fans right now.
Well, let's go right to that. Steeltown football fans, they're screaming for immediate changes. I don't know what changes. I mean, I think we can exactly go where we think we're on this one. The team are hitting their final bye week, Hustler. Should this organization make some type of a move?
Well, listen, for fans, and often the first guy that gets the heat is the head coach. And I'll just go right out there. That makes no sense. I mean, you cannot change at this point in the season and expect to have any real positive results on the football field, in my opinion. So you're looking at the quarterback position. And I mean, BC last week, after losing Nathan Rourke, made a pretty ballsy move considering the start that they'd really earned for their team at 8-1, and went and got Vernon Adams Jr. And it was interesting to see. I mean, this is, completely speculative right now, but I mean, you're always looking to see good quarterbacks that might not be playing. Who knows what the future of Bo Levi Mitchell is long-term in Calgary, although I don't think at their position they'd be looking to move on. But I mean, if you watch that game yesterday, it's pretty simple where you need to figure it out, and that's quarterback. And listen, Dane Evans, I thought, was disappointing, to be honest, early on. You talked about some of the turnovers. I mean, they really have been the authors of their own demise quite a bit this season, and I think that's why there's a big question mark even when healthy with that quarterback room. If they were able to get an athlete to come in that they think that could challenge or could give them some life at the quarterback position, I think that's where you'd start. But I mean, as we all know, especially at this point in the season, it's a lot easier said than done. And that could be unfortunately a project for the offseason.
Scott, is this just a lot of fan noise? I mean, is there anything that you see, maybe even positionally wise, other than the quarterbacks that maybe need some type of upgrade? I mean, the trade deadline is the 5th of October.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what's been said. I mean, there's 6 games left in the regular season for the Ticats, and I guess mathematically, they could still take the second, place spot in the East. But I don't know. I do think this is something that you have to deal with in the offseason. I mean, from a quarterback standpoint, if you just looked at Dane Evans in terms of yardage and pass completions, it's great. And then you look at turnovers, but you can look at that across the board. I mean, the Ticats have been their own worst enemy all season long. And I just don't see how that's magically going to change over the last third of the season, no matter what you did personnel wise. So yeah, I agree that you just kind of get through this year, however it finishes, but then you take a long, hard look at things in the offseason, especially at the quarterback spot.
Luke, as I kind of said to you, all you guys here, as I walked out of the stadium, in all my years of walking out of Ticats Stadium, I have never been ambushed by fans that want change. And the familiar name that kept coming out, and again, this is not to point fingers, but this is what the fans are saying. And I mean, they do have the right to voice their opinion. They're paying for the tickets, and they want changes at the offensive coordinator position. And you played for Tommy Condell. Is his play calling an issue with this offense? And not just yesterday's game, but looking all forward.
Sure. To me, that is not the glaring issue right now. And there's also people talking about Orlando Steinauer, and there's people, wondering, the mysterious sort of presence early on in the season of Kari Jones and sort of how that plays into the team and what was going on there. And to me, Tommy Condell is not a change at that. In that office is not going to be the fix right now. Certainly not in the middle of a season. You cannot call a successful professional football game when you don't have a guy at quarterback who you can trust to make the throws and make the reads that you need. You gotta have a high level operator behind center, and the other position groups as we go around, Bubby, they did make a change at center, and they got in the veteran David Beard. That's been a position group that suffered equally of injury for the whole season, and they've tried their best. Chris Van Zyl has, of course, been out for a long stretch here, and there's been change-ups there. But I think that Toronto was able to have good pressure and force these young quarterbacks to make decisions that they maybe weren't capable of working through on their own. It's the problems are sort of escalating, mounting on top of each other now. To me, fixing or making a change at the coordinator position isn't going to be the answer to the solution with 6 games left in the season.
Fans also were questioning Coach O and his decision to go for it on 3rd down and 1 from his own 27, Luke. And that was a failure with the 4th-string quarterback, not the 3rd-string quarterback in there. Your thoughts on that? You know what? I think it's at the time of the game where you do it, and it was a short one. It was 3rd and 2 feet. And I think you put that in the hands of your offensive line to say, you guys got to make this happen for us, because we cannot punt the ball away right now.
Yeah, the execution wasn't there, but I mean, that's an automatic call. I mean, what does it say to your football team if you bring the punt out team at that point in that game?
That's right.
I mean, it would have been a terrible message to the team and the fan base. I mean, they had to get it done. And, unfortunately, I mean, that play, I mean, I don't know, Luke, you know the numbers. I mean, that's 19 out of 20. That's in. You just have to get the half yard that was there. And rarely do you see it blow up the way it did, unfortunately. But, new and younger players in there. I mean, your success rate maybe goes down a little bit, and it did bite him yesterday afternoon.
So there's one other point on that play is as the teams are practicing their short yardage package, there's not just one, play. You've got to the right, to the left, and maybe that wide style short yardage play, like the one that they attempted. If you're going to criticize the play, it's not the call to go for it. Potentially I could say I would make the argument that maybe maybe you have a higher probability to do your classic straight off either side of the center short yardage play. They really kind of went for that sort of, through the C gap to the right type of short yardage play. Either way, we're talking about high probability play calls and a moment in the game where your team needs to stay on the field offensively. And it was legitimately less than a yard. And in the CFL, you get a yard for free almost. So you put that on the offensive line and the quarterback to operate. I think if they line up again, Coach O and Tommy are going to make the same call to go for that short yardage.
But would you?
I just remember watching it on TV and seeing how slow everything was developing, and it's like, oh my God, no.
Yeah.
Would you have been surprised though that the fact that it was not Morton in there at the time in the beginning of the fourth quarter, and that it was Newman, or change that it was Morton and it was Morton, not Newman.
You're right. It was Morton who ran the short yardage. You know what? Those are the guys though that are practicing that throughout the season and kind of ready to go in. If it was Dane Evans or Matt Schultz in the game, one of those two maybe stepped in. And you're right. It maybe would have been Jamie Newman to have taken that. To be honest, I think either of those guys is well equipped to get those yards and to take that handoff. It's the kind of thing that, even that as a group on that offensive line, that's a chink in their armor too. Those guys got to get that right and take pride in having that be the gimme that it's supposed to be. But for losing teams, when it starts going wrong, lots of things start going wrong, and for all we know as outsiders here, you got a new center in there. You got some things in the works. We don't know if there was maybe a miscommunication up front or something like that as well that could have played into that play not working. To your point, Scott, I mean, it did look slow. It looked like sort of a poorly done, reverse out of the backfield where there's just so much lateral movement before you gain any yards. It kind of had a feeling of something not going right, and there was just too much penetration. Again, you can put this back. The Toronto Argonauts played well, and it takes a great defensive effort to make a stop when the offense only needs a foot and a half or something.
All right, guys, the Roughriders lose a tight contest to the Bombers, who have clinched a playoff spot. Unbelievably, they're playing so well. Duke Williams, who's injured and in street clothes, has caused an official to throw a flag for unsportsmanlike. A drive stalls for the Roughriders, their hustler. And based on his previous history and some of the fines that he's gotten this season, if you're the Roughriders organization, what are you doing with this wide receiver that I believe is the second highest paid in the CFL?
Well, I can tell you if that happened in some other spots in the Canadian Football League, he probably wouldn't have a job, or he'd be a free agent and would be available to the 8 other teams. I mean, that is as inexcusable a play. And again, we're talking about a guy that was in street clothes. He is not even doesn't have a helmet on. For him to cost his team like that at such a crucial point in the game, it is something that, is pretty damn hard to walk back. The one thing for Duke Williams is that he's got a lot of company. The Saskatchewan Roughriders are a good football team, and we saw it in spades in the game on the weekend. But their lack of discipline, and this is something that's haunted a number of teams going up against the Bombers. I mean, when you have two good teams playing in close games, you cannot be stupidly handing over opportunities and possessions to good teams like Winnipeg. And that was absolutely a key play. And I think if you really go back and look at the Riders season through the first 2/3, it's been somewhat indicative of some things that have really plagued Craig Dickinson's teams. I mean, we haven't even got to Garrett Marino, his cheap shot on Zach Caleros, which was very fortunately not flagged. But this has been a constant story. But for the first time, we had a guy that wasn't actually on the roster getting in on the penalty parade. I mean, it was inexcusable, and something that I think a lot of people in Rider Nation are now finally going, how much longer are we going to deal with guys like this? Because it's really hurting the team, as great as they are when they're on the field.
Scott, is this a situation that when these kind of things are happening, that this is the fault of the head coach?
Well, at some point you got to have, I would think, upper management talking to the staff and say, look, is this who we want to be? Is this, what we want to be? I mean, the reference to Marino, I'm a UAB graduate, UAB fan. I remember when he played at UAB, and unfortunately, that's the kind of player he was at UAB too. I mean, it's a feature, not a bug. He was a cheap shot artist. So, when they brought him in, they had to know what they were getting because he's never really hidden it. And yeah, that's just a nightmare. I mean, when you're dealing with turnovers, it's one thing, but when you're dealing with all these other unforced errors in terms of penalties and sportsmanlike conduct, and yeah, a guy in street clothes that cost you a chance, that's inexcusable.
Luke, and the crazy thing is, I mean, I thought Cody Fajardo played as good as we've seen him play all season long, and had some things going on. And you know what? And I'll be honest with you, I thought they were going to pull the upset. But you know what? Let's I wouldn't mind if you do comment on what Duke Williams did, but I think we do have to get to Garrett Marino. I would expect that he's going to get fined for that cheap shot on what was kind of a flaky play that I think he could have held up on before nailing Caleros. And this would mean that coming off the longest suspension in CFL history, he would be fined in coming back 2 out of 3 weeks. And that just seems wrong.
Yeah, well, it's his history is tied into this play, into the reaction to this play, right? You can almost, as you watch it and rewatch it, he comes around the end, and you can tell, he brings his eyes around, and for a split second, you could picture why he's bracing and getting ready to hit. But as you watch it, that's what the league is asking guys in his position to be able to do. They're asking them to develop a new skill set, and that skill set is to be able to pull off a hit when you have time to do so, to be it's actual athleticism, to be able to evaluate that you can and do not need to make that hit, that you shouldn't, that it's unsafe to make that hit and to pull off. And football years past, that skill set wasn't required of defensive linemen, defensive ends. Now it is, but he hasn't developed that. He doesn't have that skill set to do that, obviously. And I'm kind of assuming the best for Garrett Marino right now. If you assume the worst, a cheap shot artist, that's an interesting term. And maybe he's saying, well, I could have pulled off, don't want to, and I think I can get away with it, which interestingly he did in the live action of the game. But yeah, that kind of football has to be done. These guys have to be able to develop the ability to pull off hits when they have the chance to do so in respect of player safety. So when you tie in then his history and the fact that he just came back off of a suspension, now you've got a bad apple. Now you've got a problem in the league. And I do agree with the mindset that this is a league's issue, that they need to take action in addressing things like Garrett Marino. Now, if this was a one-off, I think that hit looks a lot differently. But when you tie in Jeremiah Mazzoli and Zach Caleros hit into the same mid stretch of the same season, now you're kind of, everyone's eyebrows are raised, as in, what are we going to do about this guy? Because it's not the brand of football that the CFL is supposed to be.
Luke, I've got to ask you, I mean, as a former player, I mean, how does that go over in the locker room? I mean, it's one thing when something happens one game. It's another where you've got, essentially, I mean, Saskatchewan's had a cloud over that room because of Marino and some of his actions for a good portion of the season. And I think it's probably gotten their team overall maybe a little bit less rope, if you will, from the officials. I mean, at a certain point for the other guys in that locker room, how problematic can that be when you see a guy that's incredibly talented continually take things out that if it was on the other side, you'd be in a very different mind state as far as, if that happened to your own quarterback.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. And you do think about it differently. The truth is we're all people, and we all, we all have our tribes. And so you do think about it differently as a teammate. And I've been on both sides of instances like this, meaning, on a teammates of mine and then against teammates of mine. And you think about it entirely differently. I mean, as a teammate as a Blue Bomber, you're ready for them to ejections, suspensions, in the whole 9 yards. Like, don't hold no holds bar for the punishment. And it all depends on how Garrett Marino relates to his own teammates, because you can easily, as a teammate and a guy who you cheer for and respect, even if truly he did make a mistake, sometimes you kind of, to be honest, you sort of soften the blow and say, yeah, we all make mistakes. Why is everyone looking to take it out on my teammate here for this? But that's if he relates well to his own teammates. And if he's a guy who is, although throughout the league, obviously he's certainly has a negative brand right now. If he's positive with his own in his own locker room, it can be seen a very differently, let's say it that way, than the rest of us see it.
And Scott, here's the thing. I mean, I would have to believe that coming off what was the longest suspension in, for various reasons in CFL history, that you personally as an individual would think to yourself, I'm a marked man right now, that, it would force you to behave perhaps in a different way. And as Luke has even suggested, change my game. Yet we're not seeing that. Or can you change?
Yeah, see, that's what I don't know, because it's, when he was at UAB, it was like late hits, unsportsmanlike conduct. And it was usually stuff. It wasn't so much when the other player was getting hurt, although they certainly could have been, but it was always costly. So you kind of looked at that like, this guy, he's not thinking of his team. He's putting his team in a really bad situation. But then you compound it to when he's hurting people, like the Mazzoli situation, what almost happened, yesterday. Yeah, you would think there would be some introspection. And, as a fan, as a guy who, anytime a UAB player makes it CFL, NFL, you root for him. I want him, to get his act together. I hate to see that because he's obviously a talented player. But my God, this is every game. I mean, you can't make it through a single game that Garrett Marino is in when you're not talking about something negative about what he did. And that's a shame.
I do wonder if they handled this one a little differently. And I'm sort of with Luke. I mean, in a nutshell, if that is an isolated play, I mean, it isn't so egregious. And certainly it didn't end up with any significant injury as far as we know, that we're probably not talking about the league. But when we think about just this season, the rap sheet that this guy has put together, and the fact that, he was out for 4 games, which is a huge suspension for professional football. Like certainly in the National Hockey League, I mean, your prior violations are used against you for a period of time. And, for the guys that are in charge of this, I do think that, Marino has put himself into a very different situation than almost anyone else in the league. And it'll be interesting to see how this is handled, if there is anything more coming out of the game on the weekend.
And Luke, I mean, and I think Scott kind of brings it up. I mean, the guy's an animal. This is what you want on your defensive line, a guy that just disrupts play. You would hope, or you would think that this guy would rely on his talents and be able to control it. I mean, it really comes down to, I don't care if you're 8 years old or 80 years old, you got to have a certain amount of self-control.
Yeah. We all know it. The hard thing is not knowing what's right or wrong. Like he especially for the Mazzoli hit, the thing that really got everybody fired up. Yes, the hit, but then he left the field taunting the Ottawa sidelines. Like it's mounting on top of each other. It's a nasty way of being. That's not it doesn't take a sports psychologist to analyze that this is bad behavior. Like this is unacceptable in the professional sports league. And so we all have that colored lens glasses on as we see him, nudge Collaros in a what was clearly a manner that now we all think, we're surprised that he didn't go taunting, the bench after he did that. And so that counts. He's got to live with the rest of the world seeing him through the lenses that he's painted for us. I mean, that's just the reality of his situation. And it seems to me like this hit against Collaros was meaningful or substantial enough for action to be taken against it.
Let's move on, guys. Vernon Adams Jr. is now a member of the BC Lions. And of course, we've been well documented with their quarterback issues and no Nathan Rourke. And there's certainly some question marks there. The good thing, I guess, for them is that they've built up a good amount of equity in terms of victories to maybe coast a little bit, if you want to say that. At the end of the day, they do acquire that veteran quarterback. Hustler, what do you think here? Is this a slam dunk that he's going to be the starting quarterback of this team?
I mean, listen, I think down the stretch, probably. Hey, listen, if Michael O'Connor, what a story that would be. I mean, another Canadian quarterback stepping up and proving that he can do it. But it was pretty clear. I think they realized that they've got a hell of a squad and a team that they've been able to build around, two young Canadian QBs that are probably making combined a fraction of what the top QBs in the league are making, which has really helped them fill out the rest of the roster. So the bottom line is, I mean, they started off 8-1. They have just been, the story really, in addition to the great start of the Bombers. But I mean, what Nathan Rourke did this year has been just incredible for the franchise of the league. And I think they realize that they've had a good enough start. They're pretty much guaranteed to be a playoff team. And the way they played against Winnipeg and Calgary this season, I think they owe it to themselves, the fans, the organization, to do everything they can to give them as good of a chance as possible to compete when things get going come playoff time. So Vernon Adams, best quarterback on the market, obviously started there as well. Bit of a full circle for him coming back. I think the smart money is on Vernon Adams being the guy. That might take a week or two to come in. But first and foremost, for a team that has ideas of getting to the playoffs and challenging for a potential trip to Regina, we saw it yesterday in the Ticat game. You need more than one guy because, who knows who's going to be available. And with Rourke being out for probably the rest of the season, I think they pretty much did what they had to do and got the best guy in the market to fill out the room.
Luke, if June Jones didn't fall in love with Johnny Manziel, Vernon Adams Jr. could still be a Tiger Cat, maybe. What can he offer a team?
That was a strange training camp, by the way. There was a lot going on that year at McMaster University. He's a high energy guy and he certainly can make plays. Every CFL fan has seen him, in the games where he's been on and at his best. He's a fun player to watch. I absolutely love this move by the BC Lions. I think this is a team who's saying, this is the reality of the cards we've been dealt. We lost our all-star. We're going to go out and do the best we can on the open market and not for next year, for this year, like for next week, and I think this is just exciting, trades and moves within a season. And it's a team trying to give it everything they've got to chase down Winnipeg and to enter the playoffs with a chance to get a Grey Cup. And for BC to make that move, I expect to see Vernon Adams quickly. I can't imagine that we don't. And I think it's probably, you evaluate other trade opportunities for them. I think this is that was probably a pretty smart move, maybe the best they could have done at the time. And I'm excited to watch what Vernon does. His time as a teammate with me, it was very, very quick in a training camp, but he is exciting and he has the ability, like a lot of the great ones do, on his feet and with his arm. So, part of it is him being able to stay healthy. That's obviously been part of his story throughout his seven or so year career. And sometimes when he's at his best is when those injuries have come. You notice back to when he's really, he can stretch outside of himself, and he needs to stay healthy for this BC Lion team if he can make a run with them through the playoffs.
I'll say this, it's a huge opportunity for Adams as well, who, has had his ups and downs in the Canadian Football League. I mean, he goes in to a great team with a great record. I mean, amazing playmakers around him in that offense. And let's face it, with the season that Rourke had, there is the potential that even with this injury, he could potentially get NFL looks next year. And I mean, Adams, I think if he goes in and has a real strong second half of the season, could almost put himself in a position to maybe have a long time of service with the BC Lions. But of course, they're focusing on this year first on that.
The funny thing about, Luke, I know you saw this, Scott, we get your comment on this first. We always talk about Vernon Adams Jr. in sort of like the sun and the moon. There's like the good VA and then the bad VA. And I don't know, and Hustle, you maybe bring it up is a good point too. The talent that surrounds him should benefit him in terms of really getting the best out of Vernon Adams Jr., I believe. This might be,
you're so right, Huss. This might be the best opportunity for him. I mean, Montreal was not really going to be much for him, at least this season. And if he actually is healthy, which by all accounts he is, this is the best thing he could have done. And it seems like he had a part in this too. I mean, it seems like he was looking for a way out of Montreal. And I think he's got a chance here.
Scott? I agree completely. Yeah. I mean, he's coming into a situation where he's not being asked, he's not being told, look, you have to do everything. You have to come in here and turn things around. No, you just got to come in here and kind of, maintain what we've already done. And, I know from a fan, it was just so sad to see Rourke go down because he was having such a great season, good story that we've already talked about. But yeah, I mean, this is what they had to do. I mean, this is why they gave up a first round draft pick, to get Adams. So I think it's going to turn out working out well for him, because I think he's going to step into a situation where he knows that he has a lot of other pieces that are already working. And I think that's going to help him out.
Hustler, are the Lions the next best in the West? I mean, you've seen them the most, or Saskatchewan. We now with Mayor in Calgary. This is going to be quite a finish in the West.
It absolutely will be. And, obviously with the loss of Rourke, it maybe takes a little bit away from the race for first. I mean, the Bombers have swept Calgary now. They're 3-0. But I'll say this. I think back to that last game between BC and Calgary. And, I mean, it took incredible heroics from Rourke with that comeback to go in and win by 1 point, 41-40. I mean, if they have any sort of drop off at that quarterback position and Mayer plays the way I think he is capable and we've seen of so far, to be honest with you, I think at this point without Nathan Rourke, I think I actually might give the nod to Calgary. But again, the BC team right now, we'll see how they look with Vernon Adams Jr. I mean, I'll sort of hedge that because we don't really know the way they're going to look going forward, but it was incredibly close. And I will say this, even from a Bombers perspective, it's tough to beat a team twice. It's really tough to beat a team 3 times. And it's very, very hard to beat a team 4 times in the season. I'll be honest, if it is Calgary coming to Winnipeg for the West Final, despite the way the Bombers have handled the Stamps this year, and really since Zach Caleros got to town, it'll be far from a sure thing that the Bombers are going back to the Grey Cup.
Luke, I'll throw that to you. And I won't say who's the best challenger to the Bombers, but who would you like in that West semifinal game of those 3 teams?
Yeah, that's great. There's too many unknowns now for BC. It's hard to say. The Ticats actually played the Lions pretty well in Vancouver earlier this year. And it was one of the Ticats' better performances. I mean, obviously they have the 3 wins, but it was one of their better games. And so I think there's something there. I got to tell you, the Calgary has been a hard team for the Ticats in the last decade of football. The mix up that Calgary has at quarterback right now, or the adversity that they're dealing with as well, and the changes and the change they've made, that's really interesting. Bo Levi Mitchell has, for the most part, been a Ticat killer in his career, but I'm most excited about what the BC Lions are going to be this year, and for Winnipeg and BC, that seems like a great Western storyline to me.
Scott?
No, I agree completely. I mean, I just love when Winnipeg and BC play. I mean, even in other years, there's just something about those 2 teams when they challenge each other. It's usually a fun game to watch, and obviously being a Ticats fan, I'm not really rooting for either one. I just want to see a lot of points.
That's right. Another interesting point about Sask, House, you brought this up earlier, like the country is not excited about Saskatchewan right now. Isn't that it's interesting. Like they're kind of the kicking, they're just the kicking boy for the whole league. Like everyone just likes to dislike them right now. And so none of us have brought up that we would love to see them, turn things around and get going. It's just sort of hurt the mojo and the brand of at least the 2022 Roughriders. And it's just an interesting effect that's had with all the drama, gone along with what the on-field play. Mm.
I found it real interesting, and I just talked about Tommy Condell, the Tiger Cats offensive coordinator under heat. I did listen after the Winnipeg and Saskatchewan game. I went to, on purpose, the Roughriders post game show. Jason Moss, oh my goodness! Like, I mean, talk about fan. I'll be polite, dislike. I mean, it's hard to believe, Hustler, that people get that riled up about the OC over in Ryderville. Jeez. Oh. I'll tell you, folks, you gotta love the Canadian Football League, and you'd love the fan passion. Let's end on this one, guys. Once again, and this is not the first time we've brought this up on this podcast. In his latest public address in Toronto, he's talking to 1050 TS, and Commissioner Randy Ambrosie said the most important thing for the Canadian Football League is we need and want a 10th team. Scott, is this a pipe dream, or is this really going to happen? I would presume he's talking about East.
Yeah. I don't guess they're going to put a franchise in Birmingham again, which kind of, I'd love to see that. But yeah, whether it's, the Atlantic Schooners, which don't exist, but you've heard about them forever, or maybe putting a team in Quebec City. I mean, it would just be kind of cool to have a 10-team league and then, a balanced schedule. I just like an even number in a sports league, which has nothing to do with anything. It just makes more sense to me. But, you guys know a lot more about that than I do, about whether it's actually feasible or if it's just something that, people like to continue to talk about.
Luke, you played a game out there, I'm presuming.
You know what? It was one of my first weeks in the my first week in the CFL was the Moncton game when I was 7 days in the country in practice squad, and I started the next weekend at Guelph against Calgary. But I think it would be so exciting. I think it'd be so good for the league. In 2019, there was so much talk of that through the start of the season, as the Schooners were kind of announced, and as we built into that year. And I felt like the COVID year was kind of was going to end that, maybe for good. Like that was sort of the last thing on the radar for everyone in the world, including CFL fans, including Randy Ambrosie for a time. Right. I mean, trying to pull off a season, which never happened in 2020. And so I'm encouraged that it's being, brought up in presumably pretty strong efforts, again, and the financial reality, my gut says that it's going to take a lot, that it's lean to make this happen. But there's a lot of factors at play there, and a lot of purses involved in what it takes to get a franchise off the ground. I think it would be excellent for the league. That's my opinion. I think it would be awesome to have a 5 East and 5 West. And to have a new CFL city and branding and logo and an expansion. A lot of guys get jobs, and you find, and new players are gonna sprout up, and exciting stuff. I hope that that's a reality in the coming years for the CFL.
See it happening, Hustler? Luke, you're the perfect person to ask this next question about this. I mean, and I kind of toss this around that. I mean, do they really need a new stadium? Like, can they? I mean, you played at Guelph, and I don't know. I mean, the inner guts of that stadium at that time. I know they've made some changes, and it's a much better facility. But if they did move it around and maybe played in St. John, 4 games in St. John's, and did some other games in Moncton, some in Halifax, kind of a moving representative of the Atlantic team. I mean, we saw this years ago with the Green Bay Packers, where they played in Milwaukee, and they also played in Green Bay at Lambeau as well. Could that work, or were the facilities, say in your example with Guelph, just subpar for the league?
I unfortunately think that it is. I think it's a little bit subpar, and I think that it makes a difference to actually have a physical home, not just for the franchise, for the games, and for the logistics of the team, that the actual players and coaches, but for the fans to have a building that they call home, that feels like theirs, that they're defending on home days. And if you're a nomad, it's every game's an away game effectively, and it feels that way. Going to Guelph in a bus, on game day was, that's different. That's a lot. And it doesn't really feel like a home game. It's adversity that franchise has to go through in a season that no other franchise has to deal with. That said, I think that you got to have some creativity in the nature of that stadium. You don't need, every stadium doesn't have to be, mosaic, and not that was in question already, but it needs to be a home. It needs to be nice. And you've got to have a place that fans enjoy coming to. But once those are accomplished, I think you get a solid facility to play in and call it a day. I think it would be a great thing for the league to have a 10th stadium. Hmm.
Scott, last one to you on this angle. And I'm sure you talk to a lot of American lovers of the Canadian game. If there was to be one American franchise, and I know that Baltimore was tremendously successful, what would be the one area that would work for the Canadian Football League in the United States?
That's a good question. I've wondered if maybe a place like Tacoma, Washington, Rochester, New York, some place that's a little bit closer to the border, maybe where you have just a little more familiarity. I think that might work if any of it was going to work. I love being a huge CFL fan. That was just huge when Birmingham got a franchise, because I thought, this is great. CFL is solid. This league's going to last forever. This is going to be fantastic. And of course, forever was 18 games and a playoff loss. But yeah, I think it could work, but it's got to be a market, I think, that's a lot closer to the border than what they've tried before.
Luke, Rochester, what do you think?
That was the city on my mind, Rochester or Syracuse. You got proximity to Canada and to the rest of the East CFL cities. Personally, I would love it. I would do everything I could in my physical power to come out of retirement and play for the Rochester, whatever they'd be called. No, that would be exciting, I think, in good proximity. The Las Vegas Posse, I thought, was always an interesting, because it's such a international and, city. I think, the fan base was tough, but it was a fun concept. I I'm much more so for a Canadian expansion than a US expansion, and Halifax or out east to me seems like the 10th team option.
Husker, is there anything south at Manitoba South that would work, you think? Well, I realize that Commissioner Randy Ambrosie is a regular listener to this podcast. So we have now just given him 4 or 5 different places to investigate if you want to get that 10th team. Guys, thank you so much for your opinions, your insight, and your analysis of some of the hot topics of the week as we really get into the stretch drive of the Canadian Football League. This is the fun time, and it's getting a little chillier out there as well, too, feeling that fall chill. Scott, where do we find you and follow you and enjoy your ventures in the Canadian Football League?
AdamsonMedia.com. That's my website. I do a lot of CFL content, so that's probably the best place to catch me.
Hustler? Is there any hope for the Jets this year? Winnipeg Sports Talk, 12 months a year, guys. Good reason to listen out in the Peg and across the country. Luke, obviously, we know we can hear you on the Tiger Cats broadcast, the Coach O show. I got to throw you too. If people don't know, you're a Western New York kind of guy. Sabres, this could be the year that they finally get into the playoffs.
We'll see. It's going to be exciting. I can't wait.
It should be fun. Hey, guys, again, thank you so much for your contributions. Folks, this has been the CFL This Week on the Ticats Audio Network. We are available every Monday, back on Monday. Obviously, we had the Labor Day game, so we're on Tuesday, but we'll be rescheduled back on Monday, and that's where you can find our fine podcast again. Like, subscribe, YouTube, all your podcast catcher. We are available anywhere you want it. The CFL Talk, we are available. Once again, I'm Bubba O'Neil. This has been the CFL This Week on the Ticats Audio Network.
The CFL This Week with Bubba O'Neil. Subscribe, like, and get the deepest takes on Canada's game every Monday.